Welcome, everybody. So we're here with a guest and a longtime friend of mine, Garland Nixon. Welcome, Garland.
Hey, thanks. I'm always lurking in your chat. Oh, yeah, I'm sure you see that sometimes. I mean, I'm not saying anything, but I'm lurking in the background watching it because I enjoy your show. I really enjoy your show, and I enjoy the interactions with the people in the comments in the chat.
Well, we certainly enjoy you on this channel, and it's been great. I mean, wow, yesterday was the last episode of the Critical Hour. Wow, I just think of all the amazing stuff we have done on the Critical Hour, some of which took a while to mature. But I guess where are you at with all of this? That'll
Well,
be my
well,
first question.
all good things come to an end. I remember back when I was on Fox, the first show I did on Fox Business Channel, right? And back when I was like in the mainstream media, the way I found out that the show ended was I was watching TV and I saw something that said, Fox has announced that they've gotten rid of all of their shows between 8 and 11. And I'm like, my show comes on at 10. I think that means me. You know what I mean? So,
Wow.
I mean, in the media, these kind of things happen. It's censorship. It's terrible. But from a perspective of the media, okay, I'm fine with it. And the bottom line is, man, they have let loose a sleep. They have awoken a sleeping lion. They let me loose now. So it's no holds barred. Let's get out there and get to swinging.
Yeah, well, I remember you were on Fault Lines when I
Yeah.
first started going on with you. And then Dr. Wilmer Leon, I met him in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And
Yeah.
then next thing you know, he's telling me he's got a show on Sputnik, and you're going from Fault Lines to the Critical Hour. And it was like a power combination. And I always thought it was funny because it was a critical hour, but it's actually was two. It started out, it was an hour, and then they expanded it to 2 hours. So it was actually the critical 2 hours. But I thought that was pretty cool.
Well,
And
you know what? Let me give you a little bit of background on Sputnik since we're talking about the downfall of Sputnik. So when I was with Lee Stranahan on Fault Lines, I used to watch this show online. This guy named Jamal Thomas, the Progressive Soapbox, and I was like, wow, I like this show, right? So one day I said, let me try to get in touch with him. I sent him an email and said, hey, would you like to come on our show sometime? By phone. He says, I'll drive up there and come in the studio. I said, great. He came in the studio a bunch of times and we're talking. I'm like, man, there's an editor. You're great. You should ask. So, bottom line, he started doing a different show, Political Misfits. Well, things fell apart at Fault Lines eventually for a number of reasons. I won't get into that. But then that's when he moved over to Fault Lines. And at that point, I went over because Dr. Leon, who also at some point I had met him before, who I contacted him and said, hey, would you like to come on our show sometime on Fault Lines? He said, sure, I'll come in. And he started coming in. And we talked, and I'm like, hey, I just talked to the editor about a show. You may be interested. And he talked to the editor. So I kind of brought my friends and people who I liked on. I'd call them and bring them on, and then they talk to the editor, and then boom, and it ended up the critical hour was 1 hour 6 to 7. When Fault Lines fell apart, the editor said, hey, why don't you move over there with Wilmer and you guys will move this to 2 hours. It worked out well. It became a really good show. And before they threw us out, we were on live from 2 to 4 p.m. And then they replayed us at 6 to 8. So we were on 4 hours a day in Washington, D.C. It was great.
Wow. Well, one thing I do remember is when I first came out with this book, this is the original edition, right? If you got one of these, it's worth, a good $400 now. This was when I came out with this book, it got very little attention. I got reviewed in the Morning Star. A couple newspapers in India randomly ran articles about it, which surprised me. But then I did a couple segments on your show, with Dr. Leon, and we went on there and we talked about this book. 4 years ago, no big deal. I moved on to bigger and better things. Everyone moved on until she got the nomination. And then Amazon made the mistake of taking it down and all hell broke loose. And Max Blumenthal was tweeting about it and Jimmy Dore. And I mean, this book has now, it exploded. I mean, this book that was kind of an obscure book that I talked about on your show, it sold at least 3,000 copies in the last couple months. It exploded. And it's wild to see, you plant the seeds and you never know what could happen.
Well, I really enjoyed having you on the show, and I would always try to find articles and segments that I felt like you were in your area of specialty. We did a lot, of course, remember we do a lot on Venezuela and Cuba and imperialism and things like capitalism and things like that. And I really enjoyed working with you on fault line. I mean, fault line. So, on Sputnik. But now that it's, gone, maybe forever, I guess. I don't know. Whatever the case, I think we got a lot of work to do, Caleb. That's the way I look at it. It's not that we are. Some people look at themselves as journalists or whatever, activists, whatever. I don't know what you call it, but we got a lot of work to do. That's the way I see it.
Absolutely. No. And I'm thinking ahead. We have our Trump Tower campaign we've been doing where we have this banner with the image of, Donald Trump shaking hands with Kim Jong-un. And we're saying only peace can make America great again. We just had a great workshop in Chicago. And I mean, we're moving ahead with great things. So I wanted to mention, I have been to Nicaragua. Have you been to Nicaragua? I know you've been to Venezuela.
I've been to Venezuela, not Nicaragua.
Okay, I've been to Nicaragua.
All my friends have been to Nicaragua. I hope to go there someday.
Yeah, well, Nicaragua, there's a lot of big talk in the media about them because the president of Nicaragua, I mean, they've officially cut their diplomatic ties with Israel. And they did it. I'll actually show. He gave quite a fiery speech, to cut their diplomatic ties. I'll just pull up the clip here. We can watch Daniel Ortega's pretty fiery remarks condemning Israel as they cut diplomatic relations.
Increíble cómo al frente del gobierno de Israel se encuentra un primer ministro que es hijo del demonio. ¿Por qué? Porque lleva en la práctica una política de terror y es Hitler, ¿sí? El primer ministro de Israel es Hitler, allí instalado, llamando a destruir a los pueblos, al igual que el que preside Ucrania es otro nazi, otro hijo de Hitler, queriendo comprometer a la OTAN para irse a la guerra contra la Federación Rusa. Lo que están haciendo los gobernantes norteamericanos, utilizando a Israel, armando a Israel, lo que están haciendo los gobernantes norteamericanos junto con gobernantes europeos, porque ahí están los imperios se han unido creyendo que de esa manera van a poder derrotar a los pueblos y no se dan cuenta que al final de cuentas o llevan al planeta a una guerra total o sencillamente no les queda más que esperar la derrota.
Yeah, quite strong words. What do you think, Garland?
It reminds me of the infamous sulfur speech at the United Nations by Hugo Chavez. And, what a lot of people need to understand, too, is that the people in Latin America, the people in the global South have seen the Israelis used as weapons against them. The Israeli police, Israeli military oftentimes will be used in Latin America and Africa and other places to teach the brutal methods to be used by far right-wing forces to suppress the people's movement. So not only do they have the context of seeing what's going on right now on the world stage, they have a historical context where they've seen these people come to their country and be used as a policy tool and a tool of brutality against them.
Yeah, well, one thing that I think would be a very big interest to American viewers, which is that, people might say, well, Nicaragua, this is a socialist, anti-imperialist country, the Sandinistas. Why haven't they cut ties with Israel already? Well, little known fact, a big chunk of the support for Daniel Ortega, the president there, are evangelical Christians. And when I was in Nicaragua, a lot of the churches, they would have a picture of Daniel Ortega in the window, and then they would have an Israeli flag out in the front. A lot of these Pentecostal churches that are big supporters of Daniel Ortega are also big supporters of Israel. So that's why there was a relationship there. And Nicaragua doesn't really fit our political categories. Nicaragua is a socialist country, but they actually have Christianity in their constitution. In the preamble, it says, we are a Christian nation, Christians struggling to bring about God's kingdom on earth. They actually have the strictest anti-abortion laws of any country in the world. And the slogan that Daniel Ortega and his wife, Rosario Murillo, who's now the vice president, the slogan that they use and they have painted everywhere is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. So it doesn't really fit our like traditional left-right paradigm in the United States. You know, Daniel Ortega is culturally quite conservative. He's against gay marriage, very against abortion, but he sees what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. And even though a lot of the pastors that support him in these kind of rural areas where you have indigenous folks who converted to being Pentecostal and stuff, he says, no, it's time to cut ties. And also, I know Nicaragua and Iran are very close because they had their revolution in the same year, 1979. And that Iran is very close to Nicaragua. There's Persian supermarkets in Nicaragua, kind of like in Venezuela, where they feed people, and they have a very close relationship. So it was a dramatic move and quite fiery words that he used against Nicaragua, but against the president of Israel, the prime minister, but also against Zelensky, which I thought was important because there's a lot of folks now that are in like the progressive camp that are trying to say, oh, you know, Putin is bad in Ukraine and Netanyahu is bad against the Palestinians and they're the same. And he flips it. He says, no, that Zelensky, he is a Nazi sympathizer. He's tearing down the World War II memorials. And, you know, Benjamin Netanyahu is also committing genocide against the Palestinians. They're both funded by the United States. The USA is giving them billions of dollars to commit their crimes. So he flips that script. What do you think of that?
Couple of things, man. Number one, you and I'll send you some information I have that I learned from an article from Roger Harris that I dug into, and that there's what I believe a CIA funded, a government supported groups that pretend to be socialists, pretend to be communist, but of course the stench of the CIA is all over them. And it's interesting because what their argument is sure, you can be against the what's going on in Gaza and all of that, but we also have to be against the imperialism in Ukraine. So it's almost like they said, well, we know we can't really get these, they've looked like done an evaluation. We know we can't get these people on the Israel issue. We know they're done. So we'll play off of that. And we'll say, sure, yeah, we're good with you on Israel, but you got to stick with us on Ukraine. And what happened, I started looking, and it was like this American group at first that was against it. And then I found like one of their links was to a British group, and even the website was the same. And you looked at it, you're like, the same people made these damn websites. You know what I mean? And they had like similar names. And then they were connected to all of these socialist woke, so-called communist super woke groups. And when you looked at the people in the background, it's like, here's this one woman, she's Syrian. And when I started searching for her, she was like, yes, we must support the white helmets and the free Syrian, blah, blah, blah. And all over it was like, okay, I see what this is. So there's that issue. Let me add this. I think that for him to be able to do that, you know, he is a very astute politician if you follow his history, right? He's not just some kind of a radical guy that goes out and screams and yells, hollers at the wind. He's a very astute politician. And I think for him to do this means that he has watched the way the wind's blowing in Nicaragua, and he now feels that he has the support and the clearance from his people. He's probably talked to leaders and churches and blah, blah, where are you? And he now probably feels the sentiment has changed enough in Nicaragua that I can do that. So it's not just reflecting that Daniel Ortega feels that way, but it's reflecting that Daniel Ortega feels, understands, believes that he has the support from the church leaders and the people in Nicaragua now that he can make that move. I also think that the last thing I'll say, and this is important too, because you brought up some great points here, and this is another one. Americans simply align cultural conservatism and religion. That's the right. And people who are either, you know, whatever the left has to be, they're atheist or they're not in a religion or whatever. Right now, think about the Black community. They've traditionally been one of the most anti-war communities, you know, groups in favor of lots of because there's a lot of poor people, right? In favor of lots of government help and all that lefty kind of things, right? But they have traditionally been, you know, a religious and a culturally conservative group. So what American politics tries to teach us is that cultural conservative means right wing. But if you look throughout the history of socialist countries, it's fairly normal to be somewhat socially old school families, wife, a husband, and kid. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I'm saying that that is only seen as right wing through the context of neoliberal American politics.
Right.
That doesn't define right or left in the rest of the world, particularly in the global South.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, there's a lot we could look at there. I mean, when you talk about this game of like manipulating socialist groups, there was an article that was on the CIA's website that I started quoting, and I wrote articles about it for New Eastern Outlook magazine, which was the web magazine of the Russian Academy of Social Sciences and other things. And then they took it down. I noticed when Biden came in, they took it down from the CIA website, and I was always quoting it. So you have to go on the Wayback Machine to read the article. But it brags about one of the most successful programs the CIA did was called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And what it was, in the height of McCarthyism in the United States, 1949, I think, when, the anti-communist hysteria was going on, the Soviet Union, they got their friends, the composer Aaron Copland, the amazing composer, W.E.B. Du Bois, the African-American intellectual. They got all kinds, Albert Einstein and all kinds of people. And they put on a conference at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And it was called the Waldorf Conference for World Peace. And so many scientists and artists and intellectuals came out and defended the Soviet Union and said the Soviet Union is right and all of that. And the CIA saw this and was just seething, like, how can this happen? And so the CIA launched a program of funding leftist voices, intellectuals, writers, artists, to be leftists, to be socialists, but be against the Soviet Union. And they hired Sidney Hook, who was a New York City socialist professor who'd had a falling out with the Communist Party. They hired him to run it. And they also hired Irving Kristol, who became the father of neoconservatism. That's Bill Kristol's father, the Weekly Standard. But at that time, Irving Kristol was calling himself a Trotskyist, a Trotskyite communist, and he was the head of the Congress for Cultural Freedom program. And then I always tell people about, this concept of fourth generation warfare. Google that phrase, fourth generation warfare. William S. Lind was this Pentagon strategist who talked about how in Iraq, the way the USA was able to kind of manipulate and confuse the resistance was by sometimes, they would make friends with one faction, they would attack another one, then they would flip, and they would subtly give money to one faction against another. And they made it so basically the way, and this is Brzezinski too, he talks about this, you don't want a light switch. You don't want an either or situation. In Vietnam, you were either with the American occupiers and the old regime they were propping up, or you were with the Vietnamese. It was very clear. And so the Vietnamese won. People didn't like the way things were, and the Vietnamese won. But if you make it a clusterfuck where nobody knows who's on what side, it's like you're either with the establishment or you're in crazy land and everything outside of the establishment is this confused mess. Well, then the establishment can win by default. And that's how they won the Cold War. Originally it was the communists versus the Western imperialists, but then China had their falling out with the Soviet Union, and then the Western European communists cut their ties with the Soviet Union, and you had Pol Pot invading Vietnam, and pretty soon, by the 70s and 80s, it wasn't clear. All the forces that were saying they're against American imperialism were all fighting each other, and it wasn't clear who was on what side, and so the USA was able to kind of isolate the Soviet Union and win by default, and that's their strategy. And that's why I think it's important for all of us who get what's going on in Ukraine. We got to be friendly with each other, whether we're libertarian. I'm friends with Angela McCurdle, the head of the Libertarian Party. She gets it on Ukraine. Maybe we can argue about the history of communism all day, but she's been on this YouTube channel before, and we've talked. We sponsored her rally in Washington, D.C., which you spoke at, Rage Against the War Machine. How was that, by the way?
Well, this time it was not many people there. So, it wasn't nearly as successful as the last time. But, I did my thing and I spoke there and I enjoyed it. Let me share something with you.
Sure,
let me share this to you. Oh, there you go. If you can put that up on the screen. Look at this.
Wow.
Ukraine Solidarity Network, a socialist, feminist, and look at the little fist, anti-racist, right? Okay. And you look at it, the stench. Look down there. Gendered violence process, right? If you look all over this, man, the stench, and they've got, we oppose the capitalists and blah, blah, blah. And I will get, let me search. They got, oh, wait a minute. Hold on 1 second.
Sure, sure.
Putin. Oh, it's not giving, not letting me search. There we go. Oh, okay. They don't have the, I would expect the word Putin in there a million times. But the bottom line is this. So this is this Ukraine Solidarity Network, right? But if you continue to weed through that, you'll find that there's one in England, and the website looks alike, and you start seeing what you see in this so-called network is so-called socialist woke organizations, and they'll use Marx and Lenin's name and stuff like that. But when you read into it, man, it's CIA, MI6, all from top to bottom.
Sure. Yeah, and this is the trick they've been running for a long time, is the manipulation of different voices that speak in the name of socialism but are on the same side as the imperialists on one issue and against another, and that's kind of how they run these games. I also wanted to mention though, you've been to Venezuela, and the big news item that happened this morning is now the NYPD has come out and they've said that there's 20 Venezuelan gang members who have carried out over 50 robberies in 42nd Street area. That's Times Square. That's, where the UN is. Like, that's a big area. They've done over 50 robberies, these Venezuelan guys, 20 individual gang members, right? And they haven't been arrested. They're still out walking the streets. And that's the NYPD has come out with this. And I'm sure this is related to Eric Adams getting indicted. This is related to the upcoming election. But to have that, like, that was a bombshell, to have the NYPD chief get on there and say, yeah, these guys are walking the streets. Now, what we're not hearing, though, is you can be sure if these guys were given visas to come to the United States, these are not pro-Maduro, pro-socialist Venezuelans by any means. What do you think of that?
Oh yeah, they're clearly operatives, and they're probably, the problem is if they arrest them and these guys and they start saying, okay guys, you're going to go to jail, they may say, wait a minute, you can't put us in jail because we were brought here by fill in the blank, and they told us that we were safe and blah. What happens if these guys start singing? You know what I mean? They'll have to Epstein the whole group of them, because good and well they're right-wing lunatics who probably were involved in some assassination attempt on Maduro. Oh, these guys they've got the stench of intelligence all over them.
Well, right. And apparently they're pretty nasty. I mean, what these guys have been doing, I mean, they've been walking through the 42nd area with baseball bats, which New York City, they're really strict about weapons. If you try to walk around with a baseball bat, they'll arrest you just for having a baseball bat. But they walk around 42nd Street. They've been walking around with baseball bats, and they'll walk up to like an old woman or whatever and be like, give me some money. And if they don't get the money, then they will beat them over the head with the baseball bat and like beat them on the ground. I mean, this is pretty nasty stuff that's happening in like broad daylight. I mean, this is pretty awful stuff. And there's a lot of anger, and it's a lot of Trump supporters are like, these are migrants who come into the country, but these aren't migrants from Mexico. These aren't from Haiti. These folks are from Venezuela. And why were they brought in? And I've got questions. And why now? I mean, it's good that the NYPD boss is on there saying they won't let us arrest them, but what's really going on here? I got to ask questions. I think we'll find out after the elections exactly what's going on, but I smell a deeper story here. We know these have to be right-wing Venezuelans, no question about it, but go on.
And it makes sense to me, because let's face it, everybody knows that's the kind of people that the CIA always gets involved with. You know what I mean? You find these guys who were trained by the DEA, and they're in Haiti rubbing out Jovenel Moise. They're ISIS. They're running around, or they're, as we call them, vanilla ISIS guys running around Ukraine with Hitler tattoos all over them. So right. The CIA always gets the nastiest people. In fact, look at what happened in England, where some of them like blew up a concert. They do all kinds of. So we keep finding these people that the U.S. or Canada gets involved. Remember, Canada was in trouble because they were bringing wives, teenage underage girls. Remember that? They were taking.
No, I didn't hear about this. What happened?
Like Syria, the intelligence agencies were transporting these girls to like ISIS Syria as brides.
Wow.
But the bottom line is this: these are the kind of people that they get involved with, and you know what? Sooner or later, these things always come back to haunt us You know what I mean? Not them. They come back to haunt us. And I think you're right. They're trying to hide out. They're trying to hide who was behind it. And, you know, since Trump and those guys were involved in going after Venezuela, it won't surprise me if they got a little egg on their face. They may shut this one up because they may have a little egg on their face too here, you know?
Yeah, well, with Venezuela, it's going to be interesting. So we have Anya Parampil did a great reveal, right, where she showed that Trump actually wanted to have a meeting with Maduro and possibly improve relations. And John Bolton prevented it from happening. And then John Bolton now we know is endorsing Kamala Harris. She's even got an ad for him, right? So John Bolton was the main guy pushing Trump to do anti-Venezuela stuff. He hates Trump. But we also know that Elon Musk, who is for Trump very hard, he has personally financed, like with his own money, all kinds of anti-Venezuelan activities. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I've also heard that Eric Prince of Blackwater has created like a fundraising website to overthrow Maduro. And he's running like a GoFundMe or something to overthrow Maduro. He's raised like billions of dollars or something. So I'm curious. I hope that things could improve with Venezuela in a Trump administration, you know, now that John Bolton is out. And I guess that was what was leaked. They made it a big scandal that Donald Trump, at one point, he said, "I'm bored of Venezuela" in the meeting. They were talking. They had Elliot Abrams and Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. They were the three guys that were going to overthrow Venezuela. And they had the food truck that caught on fire. And then it was revealed by Max Blumenthal. It was actually, they lit their own food truck on fire. Then after that, Donald Trump said, "You know what? I'm bored. I just don't want to talk about Venezuela anymore. I'm tired of this." And Elliot Abrams and John Bolton were like, "What do you mean you're bored?" You know, they wanted to overthrow him. And Trump was just like, "No, I just don't see anything to gain for me." That's what I think is our best bet here. Trump is selfish. And I mean, he doesn't want to be remembered as a warmongering president. He doesn't want to be remembered as the guy who starts World War III. He wants to go down in history as a guy who did good things. And that makes me think they won't be able to push him to do some of the stuff that the deep state wants to do. I mean, I don't know. It's possible Trump could get in and do awful things. I mean, he murdered Qasem Soleimani and brought us to the brink of World War III. That was a devastating blow to the Islamic Republic of Iran. But that was also when he was being impeached, if you remember correctly. It was during the impeachment thing he did something, and that was interesting as well. So I don't know. I have hopes and fears about a Trump presidency, but I just think, you know, with Kamala, we're lost. I mean, with Kamala, you know, head for the hills. I mean, he's got to be better than Kamala Harris, but, you know, but we'll see.
You know, I do tend to think that, you know, you're not going to be able to completely judge a second Trump administration by the first. I think you got a different Trump this time. Number one, they've gone after him big time, and you know Trump wants some revenge. He wants some get backs, as Snoop Dogg said. So I think part of it's going to be he's going to want to look into the, you know, some of the things that was done to him. So I think there's going to be a focus on an internal focus with him. I think that to some extent you'll see Trump, you know, and it's interesting you said that he wanted to meet with Maduro. It doesn't surprise me because Trump's the kind of guy that always wants a deal because he thinks, you know, part of that's ego. I'll get the deal and I'll show everybody that I can do what nobody else could do. He wants to come back and get deals. Now, they've made it harder over these 4 years. The neocons have made it impossible almost to get deals. But I think Trump feels like he can get deals. And so I do think that it will be a better Trump administration. Part of even the Soleimani, I remember reading, I don't know if it's 100% true, that Pompeo and a couple other people came to him and said, "You got to kill Soleimani. You got to do this, blah, blah, blah." That he didn't even know who the hell Soleimani was.
Of course,
and he was convinced by the neocons around him. If he's surrounded by an RFK Jr. and a Tulsi Gabbard and some of these people, God knows I do have some problems with those people. Sure. But comparing them to Pompeo and Bolton, you got to think these people are going to be better than that if they're in. You know what I mean? I mean, as you said, look, if you're comparing them with the devil himself, this is not to say that they're the second coming of Gandhi by any stretch of imagination of either of them. But I'm just saying maybe you have a chance for some sane policies. I'm just asking for sane. Is that too much to ask for, Caleb?
Sure. Yeah. And I also do think there are real differences related to the U.S. economy. I think it's pretty clear that Biden and Kamala Harris, they are all for these big monopolies. They just want Amazon and Walmart to have absolute power. They want to crush the small business owners, and they just want a monopoly, and they want kind of monopolies, that are managed by the government, have a close relationship with the government, and they want to drive down living standards. They want to reduce the population, et cetera. Whereas Trump is more tied in with the domestic economy and, wealthy people that want to see the population go up so more people can buy their products, want to see more paved roads in their neighborhoods, and that Donald Trump is a little bit closer to the domestic economy than the international economy. That's not to say there aren't people in the Trump camp that are, Sheldon Adelson, he's tied in with Israel and et cetera. And there's plenty of people in the Trump camp that are globally oriented. But I think that there's kind of a push and pull between these global corporations that dominate the U.S. economy and dominate the world, and the domestic U.S. economy, and that Trump is a little bit closer to the domestic U.S. economy, which is being left behind. But I mean, at the end of the day, we're just going to have to see. I will say that, I am very proud of the fact that we got the ball rolling with this book, because now there's stuff I didn't even think about. I mean, you saw Candace Owens has revealed that Kamala Harris lied about her grandmother, right? There's this woman in the pictures that she says is her grandmother. Is no way that could be her grandmother. It doesn't make any sense. Now we're hearing that Kamala Harris plagiarized one of her books. She big sections of her books on crime is cut and paste from somebody else's work. I mean, it's like the Kamala Harris thing is just coming apart. I mean, is there any chance she could actually win this? I feel like there isn't, but I mean, if it's a fair election, there isn't a chance, but I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I'm just seeing everything come apart, but then I know that not everybody sees that, right? We see people that are critical in our social media bubble, but other people might be seeing other things. But the question that I've been getting back to people is saying, I think Donald Trump, he pulled a page from Reagan where he said, are you any better off than you were 4 years ago? That's a fair question. Do you know anybody who's better off than they were 4 years ago? I don't. I look at the way things are right now. Things were not great under Trump, no question about it, but I don't think we were better off 4 years ago.
Lockheed Martin's doing pretty good.
Yeah.
But outside of them, well, and again, I think one of the things that is critical here, we may be at a turning point where, because what we're seeing is people in the Black community that have been Democrats for generations, right, are now like, nah, come on here. They're looking at camera like, you're trying to force a Black person on me, and I don't think she's Black. They're looking at her and they're like, so they're starting to see through the identity politics. They're saying materially, my standard of living is depreciating, and you're telling me that it's getting better. So they understand they're being gaslit. I was watching some video and there was like these Black guys on the street, and he was like, and whoever was involved, they were like, yeah, things have been really crappy. And the guy's like, well, that's not true. Under Joe Biden, the economy's improved. And he goes like that. And they're like, they're back laughing. They didn't even talk back, discuss it with them. They just burst out in laughter like, oh yeah, you gotta be kidding me, pal. So wow. I think that, and you're seeing other people start to say, look, we've been voting for Democrats for years. They ain't doing a damn. Now, they didn't say they're voting for Trump. Some of them did. But they're like, we've been voting for these people for years. Our cities are falling apart. Our communities are shot to hell. You know what I mean? Blah, blah, blah. So they're starting to finally ask the question that I think is important about transactional politics. I'm voting for you. You got to provide something for me. You're giving me nothing. That's a good conversation for people like us to hear. Because once you hear somebody start questioning the system, they're already halfway there. All you got to do is point out the problems with the system, and now they're moving. You can get them moving in the right direction.
Yeah, well, I have been raising the alarm about who Kamala really is and what kind of prosecutor she was in California. I put together this clip, so I'm going to show it here. I edited this together. I'm proud of it, because Trump, he's saying that she was like soft on crime. That is not what she was. She was absolutely vicious. This is who Kamala Harris was.
That with the swipe of my pen, I could charge someone with the lowest level offense.
She put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana.
So I learned at a very young age the power.
So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy.
The power.
Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my reelection.
And because of the swipe of my pen, that person could be arrested. They could sit in jail for at least 48 hours. The power.
She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor.
As a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick.
The power. They could lose time from work and their family, maybe lose their job. They'd have to come out of their own pocket to help hire a lawyer. They'd lose standing in their community, all because of the swipe of my pen.
Usually the job comes with a badge.
The power.
And there is often an artistic rendering of said badge on your stationery. And I have a huge stick.
The power. Weeks later, I could dismiss the charges, but their life would forever be changed.
And I have a huge stick.
So I learned at a very young age the power.
Held up the letter, said if you don't go to school, Kamala's going to put you and me in jail.
The power.
Yes, we achieved intended effect.
The power. Weeks later, I could dismiss the charges, but their life would forever be changed.
And I have a huge stick.
When you were in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who were on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
Yeah. I mean, that is who she was as the California prosecutor. The folks at Reason Magazine did a great job exposing the drug lab scandal, where these drug labs were turning over false positive results, and she covered that up. And people, over at least 1,000 people had their sentences and their convictions overturned because of that. There's so many examples of her just destroying people's lives without the slightest regard. This is a woman who really has no moral compass whatsoever, and it's something that we shouldn't have in the Oval Office.
And I'll add this. In the Black community, particularly, when you look at it, and one of the things they're saying is that the Democrats are losing Black men. They're losing Black men. Okay. I think that's one of the reasons. Come on, you're running a prosecutor. That ain't going to go over real good as far as Black men. A lot of them who have faced unjust actions against them by law enforcement, who have been charged with minor crime, who got records because they were caught with a joint that they see. The white kid gets caught with a bag of weed. He doesn't go to jail. They get charged for one joint, and now they got a record for the rest of their life. They can't get student loans. They're all screwed over, and so they don't feel that the system is fair. And now you got somebody running who's a prosecutor. And then, and I don't want this to sound like a pro-Trump thing, because I'm a lefty guy. I'm voting for Jill Stein because I want a third party, kind of thing right now. So, okay, whatever. But they look at Trump and they're like, hey, he's getting charged with a whole bunch of charges too that don't seem like they're just. You know what I mean? And they're like, yeah. And Trump says, yeah, they're coming after me. They're just trying to screw me over. These charges are all made up, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of Black men are like, yeah, I'm certainly familiar with that particular tradition in the United States. And then they look over there and she's like, I'm a prosecutor. And when I was a prosecutor, I'm like, ew, I think I'm going to go with the guy who was charged by a prosecutor rather than the actual prosecutor themselves. It is not a dynamic that will be attractive in the Black community by any stretch of the imagination.
Sure. Well, I got to tell you, the whole thing with her prosecuting parents for truancy. Now, I raised that. I talked about that in the book I wrote 4 years ago and all of that. So then her Wikipedia page was edited to say that no parents ever did any jail time. And then the source was a Los Angeles Times article that did not say that, right? And if you link to the source, it didn't say that. And now a mother has actually come forward because her daughter, who was disabled, was in the hospital. Like, she couldn't go to school. She was in the hospital getting medical treatment and missed school. And she got put into handcuffs and taken to jail. And this mother has come forward, and she's doing interviews now. So Wikipedia was covering up for her, and they said, oh yeah, she had that policy. It wasn't very good. But no parents actually went to jail. Well, now we know that there's a mother of a special needs child whose daughter was in the hospital, who was actually taken to jail. So it did happen. The other thing I think is amusing is, Jill Stein, I don't agree with her necessarily on everything, but she's playing a very good role. And the fact that the Council of American Islamic Relations, which is not a very radical group, that's a pretty conservative Muslim American group. That's a pretty centrist group, that they have endorsed her. That's a really big deal. So now the latest thing against Jill Stein, and I love this because I saw this with Charles Barron. I campaigned for Charles Barron in New York City when he was running for Congress. the big smear on Jill Stein is David Duke, the Ku Klux Klan guy, has endorsed Jill Stein. And it's like Jill Stein can't affect who endorses her. And they pulled this with Charles Barron. Charles Barron, great member of New York City Council, anti-imperialist. I just saw him and hung out with him in Florida where he was supporting the Uhuru folks and he was attending the trial. You know, he's anti-Israel. So out of the blue, when he was running for Congress, the big, you know, October surprise, the day of the election, the front page is David Duke endorsed him, right? And like nobody pays attention to David Duke anyway. He's been out of Congress for how long? I mean, he's got an obscure internet following. I think the last time he did anything publicly of note in the United States was Charlottesville in 2017. He's just this obscure guy on the internet, hates Jews, hates black people, whatever. But of course, he's trying to get his name back in the headlines. And so David Duke, he says, oh, Jill Stein is more critical of Israel, so I'm going to endorse her, even though she's Jewish, even though I don't agree with her about all this stuff. And all of a sudden, they all want to talk about David Duke. Look at this. David Duke is endorsing Jill Stein. It's like she can't control that. I mean, obviously, Jill Stein doesn't agree with David Duke. I mean, you know, she herself is of Jewish heritage, and she's, you know, she was there supporting the Uhuru movement and all of this. This is the games that they play. And the sad thing is that more than anything, it reveals how much of a cynical actor David Duke is. Because if he was really against Israel and he really supported Jill Stein, he wouldn't try to get his name in the headlines and endorsing her. Now, would he? You know, and it kind of reveals that David Duke is a very cynical person who's just a burned out old, you know, racist, basically. I don't know. What do you think?
It shows the shallowness and the stupidity of the Democratic Party also now. Let's face it. I mean, you and I know who David Duke is. Most young people you talk to, and they need young black men and they need young people of color. If you say David Duke, that's like a historical figure to them. They're not going to be like, oh, well, now I better base who I vote on. I'm glad you finally told me. I was all this time I was going to vote for Trump, and you came along, and now it's all switches because David. You know how silly he is. I was going to vote for Kamala. I was going to vote for this person, but now because David Duke, it's absurd. That is not, you know, here, the thing about it is they're always talking to themselves. When Kamala says I was a prosecutor, who's she talking to? Rich people and the people who see law enforcement as the entity that protects them from the great unwashed masses, right? Yeah. Oh, I'm glad the prosecutors and police out there to beat those little poor working class people out of it and keep them up and keep them at bay before they string us up. Those people are like, yes, she's a prosecutor. When they say David Duke, the wokies will all get together and say, oh man, we got Jill Stein now. They said David Duke. Well, to you, it's a big deal. Nobody out here gives a crap about it. They're trying to eat, man. The brothers I talk to are like, man, the prices are too high. They don't care about it. They'd vote for David Duke if they thought he'd bring, this may sound crazy. If they thought that David Duke could come in and get the price of gas down, they'd probably vote for him. You know, I've literally had people say to me, yeah, I think Trump is a racist. He called my country a shithole country, the country that I was born and my family was born from. But I'm voting for him because things are too high. So this is the chatter. You know what it reminds me of? When they say, we're going to make a peace initiative to give to the Russians. And you can tell they just talked to themselves and said, what is it that we want? Okay, we'll tell the Russians, if you'll give us Crimea and turn Putin over and decide it's a neoliberal country, then we'll end the Ukraine. And you're like, you're talking to yourselves. The Russians don't want to hear that. They're talking to themselves all the time. And the working class people out here don't want to hear that David Duke crap. They're trying to buy a pack of chicken wings and the price is doubled. And they got 4 kids to feed. They ain't got time for that.
Well, and you know, the other thing that's amusing, I will say, is David Duke, he goes by Dr. David Duke now. Where did he get his PhD? Kiev. In Ukraine. And he wrote his PhD on Jewish supremacy, and his PhD thesis that says the Holocaust never happened and all that comes from Ukraine. So that's a little detail about David Duke they're not sharing with you on the news, right? That he's he studied in Ukraine and he's probably got friends in the Zelensky administration. So that's something that they don't want us to know about. But,
you know, I just thought about something, Caleb, if you don't mind me interrupting you.
Go ahead.
Again, doesn't that smell like intelligence? It smells all over it. He's in Ukraine and he's working with the Ukrainians, and they're afraid that Trump will win. And what are they upset about right now? The Democrats are upset about Jill Stein. So they want to do everything they can to stop Jill Stein so Trump won't win. And the Ukrainians. So what would the Ukrainians really want him to do? They would want him to endorse Jill Stein to help the Democrats. It's almost like the CIA called up, hey, Dave, yeah, here's what we need you to do. And there's a bag of money in it for you. Endorse Jill Stein. Got it. Jill Stein's endorsed. What do the Democrats say? Hey, there's another thing. How convenient that at the same time the Democrats put out their anti-Jill Stein ad and start screaming about Jill Stein, just conveniently and coincidentally, that's when David Duke decides that he's going to endorse her. I smell a rat.
Well, me too.
And the rat's in Langley, Virginia.
Me too. And the other thing that people have pointed out about David Duke is that that David Duke, he has like a gambling addiction. Apparently, he loves to, and that he also he has quite an ego, right? He's had a lot of like, what do you call it? Plastic surgeries on his face and stuff like that. And that, I can imagine that all it took was somebody to call him up, maybe a donor, maybe one of his Ukrainian friends to call him up and say, David, I bet, everyone says that you're this awful Klansman and all of that, but I bet if you endorse Jill Stein, that would confuse everybody and you'd get some more attention. You'd get your name back in the headlines, just like back when you're in Congress. And who knows, maybe some other people would send you a nice donation. And I'm sure then he just said, oh, sure, I'll do that. Right. And then, but I mean, if the guy can't realize he's just being used at this point, that, but I mean, who knows? I don't want to try to get too far inside of his mind, but it is interesting to see that, that he just every so often they it's like David, like you said, he's a historical figure at this point. He's like, David who? Right. But all of a sudden they pull him out. And that's why we're all supposed to hate Jill Stein, is because this guy that, no one had heard of for the past, 5-7 years, at least 10-20 years since he's been in Congress, maybe 30 years, all of a sudden we're supposed to hate Jill Stein because of that. I will say I was very proud to stand next to Jill Stein in front of the courthouse in Florida to speak. And Charles Barron was there and Jill Stein was there. And we gave our, thoughts to the media about the Uhuru case, and their sentencing is coming up. Now, did you hear how weird the verdict was? Have you followed that? Yeah.
Didn't make sense, since it was verdict. So I'm hoping they have a chance to get it overturned, because it's inconsistent with the findings. You're not guilty of the crime, but you're guilty of conspiracy to commit a crime that you never committed.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're and if it was like a murder case, right, one could conspire to murder and not do it, but they're saying that what they were accused of doing did not constitute being a Russian agent. So therefore, conspiring to do it wouldn't be being a Russian agent either. And I guess from what I understand, the jury instructions were given very, very poorly. Is that, the judge said all you have to do for a conspiracy case is just prove that some people got together and talked or something like that. And, but the thing is, from what I understand, I mean, they have to be getting together and talking about committing an actual crime. And if you rule that it's not a crime, then you don't, you can't be guilty of conspiracy to commit a crime. It's not a crime. The other thing, though, I must say, right, is that I think really when it got down to it, the jurors were terrified of the FBI. And I was in that courtroom and I heard the jurors, talking, as they were being interrogated. And obviously I can't talk about any individual person. That would be like jury tampering. But I also heard that there were multiple requests on the part of the jury for protections of their anonymity, and that multiple times during their when they get together and confer and decide their verdict, what do you call that? The jury, what do they call that? The consultations. What is that called when the jurors get together? There's a name for it, but
when the jury was in I know what you're saying. We're both having the same brain.
Yeah. At the same time that was going on, multiple times the lawyers were called back, and the judge was responding to the jurors requesting protection of their identities. And that, every single witness was either an FBI agent or a paid expert on Russia from the FBI. They didn't, the defense didn't even call any witnesses because they said that we don't need to, because the case the FBI made. And then the FBI got tripped up on the witness stand and admitted that they lied in the indictment, that they didn't have any of the things they claimed they had evidence of. And if the jurors, if all the witnesses are FBI agents, that courtroom was full of FBI agents the whole time, And then they're coming back and saying, make sure you protect our identity, make sure you protect our I think that what it really looks like is that the prosecution had no case, but they were terrified of going against the FBI. So they said, okay, we'll give the FBI something. We'll say they did the conspiracy, and then we can all go home. The only black juror in the case didn't show up on the last day, right? And people are wondering what's going on there. That was very, very odd. And I mean, I think the FBI, I think they were just terrified of the FBI. The FBI is getting to the point it's acting just like a criminal organization. The Uhuru case they talked about, before they got their homes raided, they bought, two churches, two old abandoned churches that were adjacent to their property, and they got lit on fire right after they bought them. And that's like gangster activity, basically. I mean, it was just the FBI. People are afraid to go against the FBI, kind of like what they did with the Hunter Biden laptop in the last election, right? The FBI thinks it's above the law and thinks that if you can disagree with them, we're going to intimidate you, we're going to threaten you. And that they just, at this point, that it's not a matter of the jurors thinking that they're guilty or thinking they're innocent. It's a matter of them being afraid of the FBI. That's what I saw there. And that's very scary to me.
And the history of the FBI is they've killed people. So let's face it, they were very, very wise jurors to be concerned about the FBI. That's number one. And also clearly, they're very incompetent, but they don't have to worry about competence because there's no one to call them on it. They are the guards of the ruling elite. They are the guards, and they're doing what they've always done. You might have saw the video of the former FBI guy on Fox News who was saying, yes, my understanding of our job was we were to stop the left. He said that on Fox News. He's like, yes, our job was to stop the left from getting strength in America. And he's on there saying that. Like, yeah, that's our job. Now,
sounds like meddling in American politics to me.
Exactly. But he was telling the truth. If you look at history, that is their job. And I believe that one of the ways they stop the left is in reinterpreting the left. Right? They know damn well who the left is. But what they do is they have to reinterpret and say the left is if you're for, the whole identity politics and certain things that defines you as the left, not being anti-imperialist, blah, blah, blah. So they can redefine the left for the people out here that don't know. That way, the actual left, they can then paint them as extremists and all kinds of terrible things. And when they go after them, the people won't even know they're going after the left. They'll just be like, oh, yeah, the Uhuru movement. There's some kind of Russian bots or whatever. Of course, yeah, you go after these extremists. They're not the left. The left is on MSNBC.
Yeah, well, one of the speakers at the Uhuru rally was a guy named Ward Churchill. And Ward Churchill, he published the COINTELPRO papers, which is a really good expose of the history of the FBI, which some of the history is just outrageous. I guess the first black heavyweight champion was going to win the championship. And one of the FBI's first operations was to try and bribe him to lose the match, because they were afraid that if they had a black heavyweight champion of the world in boxing, that would inspire black people to revolt. And so they wanted to, that was one of their first operations he talks about. But he was there talking about the Leonard Peltier case, right? So there's this guy in federal prison, Native American, Leonard Peltier. And if you look at the evidence, it's very clear he's been charged. He was a Native American activist. There was like a standoff, and he's been charged with killing some FBI agents. Well, actually, it was friendly fire. If you look at the evidence, it was other FBI bullets that killed these FBI agents. They shot their own agents, but they blame Leonard Peltier for that. But what's really interesting about that case was Bill Clinton was going to free Leonard Peltier as he was leaving office in the year 2000. And FBI Director Louis Freeh assembled all of his agents and they marched to the White House. And you can read the New York Times article about it. 300 FBI agents went to the White House, with signs about, don't free Leonard Peltier. And then Bill Clinton backed down. Oh, no, definitely we won't free him. No, don't worry. And they backed down. And the other thing that was interesting is when Barack Obama was leaving office, he pardoned Chelsea Manning. He pardoned, some of the Puerto Rican prisoners. He pardoned a lot of nonviolent drug offenders. Didn't pardon Leonard Peltier. He didn't touch that, right? Because that's the FBI. That's a case that they feel is very important to them. It's very interesting how this stuff works. And that a lot of people also don't understand what the FBI is. People think, well, it's just like, you have the local police, you got the state police, state troopers or whatever, and then you got the FBI. No, we've always had federal marshals. We have the different policing agencies. The FBI was a special division created for political reasons in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution. This guy, J. Edgar Hoover, was a congressional librarian who was giving lectures on the evils of communism, and they gave him his own division, right? The government, you have the departments, and then the departments all have bureaus within them. Bureau means drawer, right? It's like you have a chest of drawers, and the FBI was a bureau. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was a special division created for political purposes to fight communism, and it pretty soon turned into like a weird cult of personality around Hoover. Like they had comic books where Hoover was the hero. They had a radio program that the FBI paid for where J. Edgar Hoover was like a hero who caught bank robbers and stuff. And they carried out a very political agenda, and they blackmailed members of Congress, and they blackmailed, various political leaders. And I know I care about this because I used to work for Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General, and he fought J. Edgar Hoover. He was Lyndon Johnson's Attorney General, and he supported the Civil Rights Movement, and he was constantly fighting against J. Edgar Hoover. And there's a great recording of him talking on the phone to Lyndon Johnson about J. Edgar Hoover and how J. Edgar Hoover is wiretapping people without warrants, but there's no penalty for doing it, right? It's technically illegal, but there's no penalty. So he was just wiretapping all these people, and he's on the phone with Lyndon Johnson saying, look, he's wiretapping people. That's illegal. There's no warrants there, but he's doing it. It's kind of fascinating. And, Ramsey Clark, he was the U.S. Attorney General who supported the Civil Rights Movement, and he eventually became an anti-imperialist. He was Saddam Hussein's lawyer. He was Milosevic's lawyer. He represented, and he also, again, this is where it gets interesting. He was one of the biggest opponents of the International Criminal Court, which is a liberal cause. That's George Soros, and the Republicans are opposed to the International Criminal Court. So was Ramsey Clark. He said the International Criminal Court is completely illegal. If there'd been any talk of such a court when the UN was created, the UN would have never been formed, right? The idea that you can have a court that can arrest people anywhere in the world. We have the International Court of Justice. That's where one country can sue another country, right? If you violate a treaty or something, that's cool. But the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is completely illegitimate. And to this day, every single person that they've ever convicted has been from the African continent. Now, before that, they had the International Criminal Tribunal around Yugoslavia, but that wasn't the ICC yet. The ICC hadn't been formed yet. So every single person ever convicted at The Hague has been African. It is purely a colonial operation. So I think about all of that. You have a background. You were in law enforcement for a while. What's it like to see it from the inside and the outside?
So, well, a couple of things. I got to add something else about the FBI. A lot of people don't know this. So after the United States overthrew the government of Ukraine, now this is weird. The FBI is supposed to do criminal investigations in the United States. They opened a National Anti-Corruption Bureau in Ukraine. Did you know that? In Ukraine, the FBI. And they were supposedly looking for corruption, but for some reason they never found anything involved in with Hunter Biden. Isn't that interesting? All the corruption around Hunter Biden. So basically, they used that to go after their enemies. And one of the things they used it was to go after Trump. One of the things that came out of that was there was this so-called Black Ledger at the time. Trump's campaign chairman was, what's his name? The guy that they eventually put in jail. I can't think of his name. If I said his name sooner, they convicted
Paul
him.
Manafort.
Paul Manafort, yeah. So he's Trump's campaign manager. So out of this thing comes this so-called Black Ledger, and this ledger says that Manafort receiving money from Russian stooges, FSB, whatever the hell, the usual stuff, right? And so then they fire Manafort, and they're connecting Trump to Russia, whatever the case may be. At the end, when Trump won, there was a big article that was written about how they were trying to make amends, and they were like, "Yeah, the ledger. We come to think of it, we looked at that ledger and found out that it wasn't so." So the FBI was working with I put it like this. There was a big movement and a lot of work done between Ukraine and the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine and the U.S. assets in Ukraine, and the Democratic Party did a lot of work on the Russiagate stuff and worked in trying to take Trump out. And that National Anti-Corruption Bureau, I think it was NABU. I think it's, you can probably look it up right now. The National Anti-Corruption Bureau in Ukraine was at the center of, there we go. As soon as I started Nabu, Ukraine. And I'll try to, if you could, I'll try to share the screen.
Sure.
NABU official website. There we go. If you could share that. There we go. National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, eradicate top corruption for the sake of successful society and an effective state, right? And there we go. Right. So, and then here's the bottom line. Does anybody think for one reason at any time, let's see, history of NABU, let's look at that. Is it central? Okay. Founding October 14th, 2014, right? And Petro Poroshenko. So there you go. Civil oversight. So the bottom line is this. As soon as they overthrew the government, they start this National Anti-Corruption Bureau in Ukraine. It was started by Comey and the FBI, and they couldn't find, for some reason, any of the American officials. Oh, I could go on and on. Amos Hochstein, he goes over there and he joins their top gas company. Cofer Black, assistant CIA director, he goes over there and he joins Burisma along with Hunter Biden. All of these Americans quit their jobs working for the State Department, go to Ukraine to make a fortune. And for some reason, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine couldn't figure out that any of them were involved in untoward activities. So that just shows what the FBI, they're supposed to be doing kidnappings, interstate violations, and they're in Ukraine cooking up lies to take Trump out.
Yeah, well, I know in Honduras and Guatemala, the Obama administration set up anti-corruption bureaus as well. You know, and that many people felt that, you know, there was like both of those countries, like they had this kind of like fake revolution during the Obama years. Nothing changed, but all of a sudden the people were out in the streets against corruption, and that they felt that those organizations set up by the Obama administration had something to do with kind of fomenting that. You know, very interesting stuff. Well, listen, Garland, you are welcome on this channel anytime. I would love to have you on. And you know, shout out to you. Shout out to my good friend Jyoti Brar, who's been on your channel.
I love Jyoti. She's awesome, and I'm so thankful to you for introducing me to Jyoti. She's great. I don't want to sound like Kathy Bates. You know, I'm her biggest fan, but I'm a big fan of Jyoti. She's such a star. She's so brilliant, and I can just sit. You know, I love to have her on, and I just ask a question. And then I just sit there, and man, the information just comes, and I'm just like this, just listening, historical information. So Jyoti's a lot of fun. Everybody out there in the movement loves Jyoti, and you know, I just everybody follow her, support her any way you can, wherever you see her. You know, watch her stuff. She's a good friend and a wonderful person.
Very good. All right. Well, it's really awesome to have you on, and we'll be in touch. All well.
Yeah, we need to do regular streams together like this.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, just let me know. We'll schedule them. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Cool.
All right. Sounds good. Talk to you soon.
Yep.